Lewis Hamilton finished the 2026 Hungarian Grand Prix in 5th place after receiving a 5-second penalty for a pit lane speeding infraction. The penalty dropped him out of position on a weekend where he had shown competitive pace throughout the sessions leading into the race. Official FIA documentation confirms Hamilton was clocked at 80.1 km/h against an 80 km/h Pittsburgh lane speed limit, a breach of only 0.1 km/h. Despite the marginal nature of the infraction, FIA regulations apply pit lane limits strictly, with no tolerance threshold built into the rule for such small overages. The Hungaroring circuit uses a pit lane speed limit set specifically for that venue, a figure adjusted by the FIA at each round based on layout and safety considerations. A 5-second time penalty is one of the standard sporting penalties issued for pit lane infractions, applied after the race to a driver's total race time. In Hamilton's case, the penalty was sufficient to alter his final classified position, moving him out of the podium positions he had been running in before the penalty was applied. The Hungarian Grand Prix is traditionally held at a circuit known for limited overtaking opportunities, which makes track position secured during pit stops especially valuable across the race. A time penalty applied after such a race therefore carries added weight, since drivers have fewer chances to recover lost positions purely through on-track passing compared to circuits with longer straights and more overtaking zones. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur addressed the incident directly after the race. Vasseur explained that Hamilton switched off the car's pit lane speed limiter too early, which caused the brief spike above the mandated limit. Vasseur said it would not have been fair to ask teammate Charles Leclerc to slow down on track in order to preserve the finishing order that existed before Hamilton's penalty was applied. This meant Hamilton absorbed the full-time penalty rather than the team attempting to manage the gap between the two Ferrari drivers. The Hungarian Grand Prix penalty was not an isolated incident. This was Hamilton's 4th penalty across 3 consecutive race weekends heading into the summer break. He received a false start penalty at Silverstone, followed by a collision penalty at Spa-Francorchamps. In Hungary itself, Hamilton had already picked up a grid penalty during qualifying for impeding Oscar Piastri, before adding the pit lane speeding penalty during the race itself. For penalties in 3 race weekends represents a notable pattern for a driver competing at the front of the championship standings. Hamilton addressed the run of penalties publicly on Instagram. He wrote, "Sometimes you just can't catch a break." In the same post, he described feeling strong throughout the on-track sessions of each race weekend, only for the results to fall apart by the end of the Sunday race. The comments reflected a driver acknowledging the gap between his competitive pace and the outcomes recorded on the timing sheets. Each of the 4 penalties stemmed from a different type of infraction: a procedural error at the race start in Silverstone, a racing incident resulting in contact at Spa-Francorchamps, a qualifying impeding penalty in Hungary, and the pit lane speeding infraction in the Hungarian race itself. The variety of causes behind the penalties indicates the issues were not linked to a single recurring error, but spread across different phases of race weekends. Following the Hungarian Grand Prix, Hamilton sits 3rd in the Drivers' Championship standings. Kimi Antonelli currently leads the championship. The exact points gap between Hamilton and Antonelli requires confirmation against the most recent standings update published after the Hungarian round, since earlier figures reported before the race are no longer accurate following the penalty and the resulting change in finishing position. The 2026 championship battle has featured shifting leadership across the opening rounds of the season, with the gap between the top drivers narrowing and widening depending on each race weekend's results. A 5th-place finish rather than a podium result at a single round can meaningfully affect a driver's position in a tightly contested championship, particularly when penalties are applied across several consecutive weekends rather than isolated to one event. At Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies confirmed in Hungary that the RB22 will receive fewer and smaller updates for the remainder of the 2026 season. This marks a shift in the team's in-season development strategy compared to previous years, when Red Bull typically continued pushing upgrades through to the final rounds of the championship. Mekies confirmed that development resources are instead being redirected toward the team's car for the 2027 season, when a new set of technical regulations comes into effect across the sport. Mekies stated directly, "We will continue to improve the RB22, but we won't be bringing the same volume of updates as last season." The statement confirms that Red Bull has not abandoned development entirely on the current car, but that the scale and frequency of new parts will be reduced compared to the team's approach in prior seasons. Formula One teams typically operate under a cost cap that limits total spending across a season, meaning resources allocated to one car's development directly reduce what is available for the other. Shifting focus toward the 2027 car earlier than in previous years reflects a deliberate reallocation of the capped budget rather than an increase in overall spending. Under this approach, engineering staff, and wind tunnel time are directed toward next year's regulations well before the current championship concludes. The context behind this decision is tied to Red Bull's position in the championship. The team currently sits over 200 points behind championship leaders Mercedes after 11 rounds of the season. Red Bull remains the only team among the top 4 constructors without a race win in 2026, a result that stands in contrast to the team's recent history of championship-winning seasons. Reports indicate that Max Verstappen's contract included an exit clause allowing him to trigger a departure from the team for 2027 if he was not positioned inside the top 2 of the Drivers' Championship standings by the summer break. Verstappen did not meet that threshold, meaning the terms tied to that specific clause were not activated in his favor. This detail is separate from broader speculation about Verstappen's long-term future, and it should be treated strictly as a contractual condition rather than confirmation of any decision about where he will race in 2027. On the technical side, Red Bull's power unit has been rated by the FIA as the strongest on the dyno among the current manufacturers competing in the sport. Because further in-season development on the engine side offers limited additional performance gains relative to the resources required, the team's broader strategic logic favors redirecting spending toward the car that will compete under the incoming 2027 regulation reset. This approach reflects a calculated trade-off between marginal short-term gains and preparation for a regulatory cycle that will reset competitive order across the grid. The 2027 regulations introduce a new technical framework covering chassis design and power unit specifications, applied uniformly across every team on the grid. Because every constructor must build a new car under the same rule set, the opening season of a new regulatory cycle historically produces the largest shifts in competitive order across the field. Red Bull's early pivot toward that car reflects an attempt to secure a stronger starting position once the new rules take effect, rather than continuing to invest in incremental gains on a chassis that will be retired at the end of the current season. At Williams, Carlos Sainz's contract is set to expire at the end of this year, leaving his position with the team unresolved heading into the second half of the season. Sainz has described his current situation as bad, very bad, a characterization that reflects the uncertainty surrounding both his performance results and his future with the team. He has stated publicly that he remains undecided about his future, without confirming whether he intends to stay at Williams or move elsewhere for 2027. Williams team principal James Vowles has addressed the situation directly. Vowles has said publicly that Sainz wants to end his career at Williams, a statement that signals the team's stated preference for retaining the driver long-term. At the same time, Vowles has acknowledged that Sainz has genuine alternative options available to him, meaning the team is not treating his continued presence at Williams as guaranteed. Verified reports indicate interest in Sainz from both Audi and Alpine heading into the 2027 season, when both manufacturers will be operating under new technical and power unit regulations. Separate reports describing a large retention offer from Williams remain unconfirmed at this stage and should be treated as a rumor rather than an established fact until further reporting verifies the terms of any such proposal. Audi is entering Formula One as a full manufacturer from 2026, having taken over the former Sauber team's entry, while Alpine continues to operate under Renault's ownership. Both manufacturers are positioning themselves for the 2027 regulation cycle, which includes new power unit rules that increase the role of electrical deployment relative to the internal combustion component. A driver of Sainz's experience represents a relevant option for either manufacturer as they build toward that new era of competition. Asked directly whether he would remain at Williams, Sainz responded, "I honestly don't know." He added that he plans to sit down with Vowles after the summer break to discuss his future with the team in more detail. This suggests that no final decision has been made by either party, with the conversation expected to take place once the mid-season break concludes. Sainz joined Williams for the 2025 season after his departure from Ferrari, arriving with expectations of helping rebuild the team's competitiveness. His current contract situation places him among several drivers across the grid whose seats for 2027 remain unresolved heading into the second half of 2026, a season in which new technical regulations have already reshuffled the competitive order among the teams. Williams' on-track performance has declined significantly compared to the 2025 season. The team has recorded only 2 podium finishes so far this year and currently sits 5th in the Constructors' Championship under the new 2026 technical regulations introduced across the sport. Vowles has acknowledged that Williams is already prioritizing development of its 2027 car over further gains on the current chassis, a strategy that mirrors the approach being taken by several other teams on the grid, including Red Bull. The drop from the team's 2025 form to its current 5th-place standing illustrates how significantly the 2026 regulation change altered the competitive order across the grid. Teams that adapted quickly to the new technical rules gained ground, while others, including Williams, have had to reassess their development priorities mid-season. This broader context explains why multiple teams are now weighing the value of continued investment in their current cars against redirecting resources toward 2027.AT Cadillac. Reports indicate that Sergio Perez is contractually committed to the team only through its debut 2026 season, leaving him free to negotiate a move for 2027. Cadillac's entry into the championship this year marked the team's first season competing in Formula One, and Perez's contract structure reflects the shorter-term commitments often associated with a new team's opening campaign. Perez's management has opened preliminary talks with Williams regarding a potential seat for the 2027 season. Vowles has described Perez as a very attractive option, citing the sponsorship backing he would bring to the team as a central factor in the team's interest. This framing places the discussion around Perez in a commercial context as much as a competitive one. Perez spent several seasons at Red Bull prior to his move to Cadillac, competing alongside Verstappen during that period. His prior experience at a championship contending team is a separate factor from the sponsorship consideration raised by Vowles, though both elements form part of the broader case being discussed in the preliminary talks between his management and Williams. Perez's personal sponsorship reportedly covers his own salary, leaving the team with surplus financial resources beyond what is typically allocated to a driver's compensation. This represents a commercial incentive that exists independently of his on-track results, distinguishing his situation from a purely performance-based evaluation. Williams therefore faces a decision between retaining Sainz's competitiveness on track and pursuing the financial advantages that a Perez signing would provide for the team's broader budget. Under the sports cost cap regulations, funds generated through driver-linked sponsorship can support a team's wider operating budget, including areas such as car development and personnel. A driver who brings in sponsorship exceeding his own salary therefore adds financial capacity